is not what you know, it's what you can prove.
You know how to cut to the core of me, Baxter. You're so wise. But like a miniature Buddha covered in hair.
I want to become a guru so girls will like me. Then I will like myself.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
This episode is brought to you by Hack Motion. Hack Motion is a cutting-edge wrist sensor for teaching wrist motion for compressed tour-like shots. I spent some time with these guys down at the show, and I really enjoyed how easy it was to use, and the calibration time was super simple, and especially the biofeedback option that will definitely make for a more effective golf lesson for your students. You can use it with your iPhone, your iPad, and it gives your students the feel to go along with the reel as you teach the proper wrist motion for better club face control, which, as you know, is huge in the teaching game. Used by some of the top coaches in our industry, Hack Motion is a must for serious golf teachers, coaches, or players. Also, when ordering upon checkout, use the promo code GURU, GURU, to receive free shipping, which is a $30 value. For more information and to order, visit their website at hackmotion.com, HACKMOTION.com today. This episode is sponsored by Alpha Herd Performance Clothing. At Alpha Herd, we believe that everyone is good at something, whether it be your favorite sport, hobby, or anything you're really passionate about. Our clothes are designed for you to not only look good, but also feel good while you're on the field, court, stage, or the top of the mountain. At the end of the day, we can rest assured that in whatever we do, we give it our best. Be the Alpha Herd of your herd. I can tell you this stuff is great. It really is comfortable. It's stylish. It's got a really cool logo. They've got regular t-shirts, long sleeve t-shirts, stuff you can work out in, which is really cool. An up and coming company for sure. So you want to check them out. You can go to alpha-herd.myshopify.com to check out these cool products, and I guarantee you won't be disappointed. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Golf Guru Show. I'm your host, Jason Sutton, and I am the Guru. On this episode, I'm excited to have my first golf scientist, Dr. Scott Lynn. Dr. Scott is a PhD and an expert in biomechanics and human movement. He is currently a professor at Cal State Fullerton, where he teaches movement anatomy, principles of human movement, and biomechanical analysis of human movement. Most of us golf instructors know him from his work with Swing Catalyst and his ground reaction forces and torques, where he has partnered with other great coaches such as Mike Adams and his Golf Swing Biodynamics program, Sean Foley, John Dunnigan, and the list goes on. Aside from being one of the smartest guys I've ever met, he is just a great dude. But really the cool thing I like about Scott, that he is not only a brilliant researcher and biomechanist, but he truly loves the game of golf, which is why he's so passionate about the work that he's doing with Swing Catalyst, which is helping myself and all golf instructors become better coaches and better teachers. Before I get to this conversation with Dr. Scott, do me a favor and press pause on your phone, hit that purple subscribe button and the plus sign so you can download this episode and every other episode you listen to on the show. And I appreciate you sharing, and I really appreciate you downloading, as this is important and allows me to continue to bring you these high performers into your earphones or your car. All right, so during this conversation, we go in so many different directions and cover a variety of topics, as I often do on this show. So I don't even know where to start with giving you what we talked about. You're just going to have to keep listening to this awesome, incredible conversation. So I'm just going to shut up and go ahead and bring on my friend, the brilliant Dr. Scott Lynn. All right, Dr. Scott Lynn, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. I was really excited about this interview because I think it's going to be an incredible podcast. We're going to learn a lot. You're my first golf scientist, PhD, that I've had on the show. How you feel about that?
Nice. That's great. First of many, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to get Sasho on here as well. I've got a few people waiting in the wings, but you're going to be the first, and and I think it's going to be awesome. So let's take the listeners back a little bit, because I've been doing some research on your career, and it's very interesting to kind of see how you came through your schooling, and just previously, as you were not just a scientist, but you were into athletics from the very beginning, right? So take us back to your childhood and talk a little bit about where you grew up and kind of how you got into sports, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you got into your craft now.
Cool. Yeah, this is a long story, but
that's okay. We got a lot of time.
Perfect. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada. So I was, and I kind of always tell a story athletically. I think I was about 3 years old, maybe, just when I was old enough to kind of stand up without falling down. My dad put me on skates and gave me a stick and sent me out on the ice. So that was the first athletic thing I ever did, was ice hockey. And I still play. I play in an old man league here in LA, so I've played pretty much my whole life. It's something that you have to do as a Canadian. I think it's in the rule book somewhere.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And so I think, and it's funny, when I get into the mechanics of how my golf swing works, I think a lot of it is affected by the fact that I grew up playing ice hockey, because you can't move in a certain way with knives on your feet than you can on flat ground. So I think that motor pattern's still in there somewhere. So it's been really interesting when I've learned a lot more about my golf swing. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that kind of the first athletic thing I ever did. I literally don't think I'd run yet before I was on skates already, playing hockey. So I've been playing hockey my whole life. I have two brothers, and we're all really close in age. I'm 18 months older than my younger brother, and I'm 2 years and change younger than my older brother. So I'm in the middle. And my dad is a golf nut. His mother was born in a little town called Pittenweem, Scotland, which is around the bay from St. Andrews.
Yeah, there's some history there.
If you drive straight across, if you drive straight across, it's I think like 2 miles. But if you drive all around the bay and go through like Anstruther and all those different little towns, it's like 5 miles to go around. But it's really close to St. Andrews. And so she was, an interesting story, she was club champion at the only all-female private golf club in North America.
Wow.
The Toronto Ladies Golf Club. So she was club champion there, and was obviously a big golfer coming from Scotland. And so my dad's played his whole life. And when my dad was younger, and we were just being born, he had a private membership at a course in Toronto. But then my mom was like, "You're not leaving for 5 hours every Saturday with these three monsters," right? We were three kids all under, and so we had to quit golf for a little while. And so his ultimate goal was to get us playing golf as soon as possible so that he could go back and play as well. So I think I had a club in my hand super young. It was actually a funny story. I think I was about, I'm not sure, six years old or so. And I got a little mini, it was a wood. It was a 3-wood, but it was actually made out of wood back then, and whenever that was in the 80s.
Right.
And so I remember opening the box as a little 6-year-old and pulling this thing out. I was like, I didn't really even know what it was. And so that was my dad's first attempt to get me to play golf. But we joke about it now. My mom's like, worst gift ever, because you're giving this club to a 6-year-old in Canada where there's snow on the ground, right? So he gave it to me at Christmas. I couldn't get outside and use it till like April. So like it was like 4 months. I'm running around the house smashing shit with it. So probably not the best gift ever, but it got me into golf. And so I've played ever since I was about that old. I played a lot of competitive junior golf growing up in Canada, and I always tell people when I was little, I played pretty well. I had this little mini baby draw. I'd start up the right side and sling it in the middle, and I could play pretty well. And then I grew about 1.5 feet in a year, and my little baby draw turned into a snap hook.
Oh, my.
And nobody could figure out how to stop it. I went to a whole bunch of lessons, and that was a frustrating time as a little kid, that loved this game so much, but just couldn't keep it on the planet. And so, so that was kind of the time when we were going to these junior tournaments around Southern Ontario, and like there were college coaches there. And David Hearn, who now is on the PGA Tour, was at a lot of those tournaments, and he ended up going down to the U.S. and making the PGA Tour. But obviously my game kind of deserted me at that point in my life. So I ended up playing college golf in Canada.
Okay.
So I went to school called Queen's University. It's kind of halfway between Toronto and Montreal. And I was there for 10 years. I did a 4-year undergraduate degree it was called Physical and Health Education at the time. It's now called kinesiology. And I also did a life sciences degree because I thought I wanted to be like an orthopedic surgeon back when I first started going to college or university. And then when I got through that, I did a master's in biomechanics and then a PhD in biomechanics. My master's and PhD were in orthopedic biomechanics, where I was looking at gait analysis. So we're looking at how people walked and the forces and torques they put on their knees as they walked, and how that could help explain why cartilage wore away and why people got arthritis in their knees.
Yeah, I read about that. I'm going to stop you there because that was really interesting to me. What did you find in that? I'm sure that led you to a lot of what you're doing now with ground forces and things that are happening with the feet. What did you learn from that?
I mean, what we did is, my master's degree, we basically did a prospective longitudinal study, which is really hard to do in arthritis because it takes a long time to get arthritis. And so I had there was a guy that did his PhD like 10 years before I got to the university, and he collected a whole bunch of older normal gait patterns. So he wanted people who were older that were healthy and had no problems with their knees, and he wanted to collect the biomechanics of how they walk, so all the forces and torques on their knees. And so he had all these people come in, and they filled out a form that said, yes, my knees are healthy, they don't hurt at all, and they took an x-ray of the people's knees to make sure there was no degenerative changes in their knee joints. And so all these people had perfectly healthy knees and had x-rays that were perfectly clean, and they were in their like 50s, 60s, and 70s. But then when he went to analyzing the biomechanics, like the actual forces and stuff people were putting on their knees, some people didn't look so normal. There were some people that had some really wacky forces going through their knee joints. And so 10 years later, I came along, and my professor's like, wouldn't it be cool if we called all these people back and tried to figure out where they are 10 years later after putting all these crazy torques and forces on their knees their whole lives. And so I called all these people back 10 years later, and it was an interesting study because some of these people were in their 70s 10 years earlier. And so I had a couple of really awkward conversations with widows where I call up and say, is Mr. So-and-so there? And the lady got kind of quiet and be like, well, who's asking? I'm like, oh, this is so-and-so from the university. He volunteered for a study several years ago, and we're wondering if he'd want to come in and do a follow-up study. And this one lady was like, oh, he'd love to do that, except he's no longer with us.
Oh, geez.
Like, oh. What do you say to that?
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. And so what we found is we think we could have predicted who would have gotten arthritis by the forces they were putting on 10 years earlier. So they were putting these wacky forces, and I don't know if we really need to get into it, but into their knee joints. And then during my dissertation, so like when you defend a thesis project to see if you can graduate, you have to present your work in front of a bunch of experts, and they get to ask you questions and stuff like that. And so one of the questions in my dissertation was, so you think you can predict arthritis based on how people walk, based on this particular force or torque pattern that you're talking about? I'm like, yeah, for sure. And she's like, okay, pretend you took me down to the lab right now, and my gait pattern, even though my knees are healthy right now, looked like the one that you think leads to arthritis. What could you do about that? And I was like, I'm sure I came up with an answer because I passed and I graduated and got
something up.
Got my degree, but I didn't know. I was like, that's really interesting. And so then I went on and designed a study for my PhD to kind of look at that, to look at some different exercises that might be able to alter those forces and torques that go through our knee joints. And one thing we looked at was foot flare, which is something that I'm now looking at quite a bit when we're talking about golf swings. And so what you find is if your knee starts hurting on the inside part of the medial side of your knee, you actually have to, like, some people will naturally just flare their feet because that actually mechanically takes the stress off the inside part of your knee. And so the PhD involved developing exercises and different things to see if we could actually relieve some of the stress on certain parts of our knee. And I think we found some interesting ways to do that. And then so that was my PhD. And I remember kind of halfway through my PhD, I always tell people a PhD is kind of like a marathon. The process is not inherently enjoyable. There are some good parts. I'm sure when you're running a marathon, right, you run by a nice nice view or whatever, but running 26 miles is not inherently an enjoyable experience.
No, the last 6 miles really sucks. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I've run 3 of them.
So, and that's exactly what a PhD is like. The last little bit is just awful. Like, to get you over the finish line is difficult. And so when I was, I had all my data and I was working on my dissertation, trying to write it up and finish my doctorate. It was one summer where I was doing that, and I had a golf membership in Toronto, which is like 2.5 hours east of where I was doing my PhD. And so what I would do is I would work like hell Monday to Thursday and try to get as much work as I could done, because Thursday afternoon I would leave and drive back to Toronto and play golf all weekend. So I'd play like Thursday afternoon, I'd play Friday, I'd play Saturday, I'd play Sunday, and then I'd drive back and work on my PhD from Monday to Thursday again. So I did that pretty much every week that summer. And I would show up, I would leave around noon, and it was like a 2.5, 3 hour drive. So I'd show up around 3 in the afternoon at the course that I was a member at every Thursday. And none of my friends could play at that time because they were all working. And so I would just show up and try to get a game every week. And there was this older guy that would show up there every week around the same time. And we played together quite a bit just because we were there at the same time. We were both looking for a game. And eventually we got to know each other. So we arranged like every Thursday we'd be here at like 3 o'clock. I remember like 3/4 of the way through that summer, he was setting up over a shot, and he was telling me about his life. And he was retired. He had made a bunch of money in insurance, had obviously a really nice lifestyle. He was a member at a private golf club. He had a nice house and all these things. I remember him telling me, he's like, you know what? I hated every second of it. He's like, my insurance job gave me the lifestyle that I wanted to, but work was awful. Like, I had to work all those hours and all that time, and I hated every second of it. And he looked at me, he's like, man, you got to find a way to make work less like work. And that kind of stuck with me. And I went back to Kingston the week after, and I was working on this knee arthritis stuff. And I was like, at one point I was like, man, this is way too much like work.
Right.
But I stuck it out. And I got the degree and I finished. But after I finished, I actually graduated at the end of September, which is a terrible time to graduate because like all the academic jobs start at the start of September. So you literally have to wait a whole year till you can get a job. And so in that time, after I graduated, I was working at a gym doing some personal training to make some money. I was trying to get my PhD papers published in scientific journals. And then I decided I was going to sneak into the lab at night and do this covert mission golf biomechanics study. And nobody was really doing golf biomechanics at the time. And the thing was, you have to turn in your keys to the lab to get your degree in the mail. So when I graduated, I turned in my keys, so I didn't have keys to the lab anymore. So one night when everyone was leaving the lab, I like snuck in and like propped the door open, and then I brought my buddies from the golf team in. And I actually set up I had this little ball on a string. It was like a golf training aid that you could hit, so the ball didn't go anywhere because the lab was not set up to hit golf balls. And I had people standing on the force plates, and I had markers on them. And I just had them hit golf shots with their foot in different types of flare positions to see how that relieved some of the stress on their knee. Because it was kind of the same thing that I did I learned how to do all the mechanics of that, or all the technical aspects of it. So I just applied it, instead of to walking, I applied it to the golf swing. And then I went in and analyzed the data and wrote it up, and I presented at the World Scientific Congress of Golf in Phoenix. I believe that was 2007-ish, 8 maybe, somewhere around there.
Right.
And going through that whole thing, I was like, wow, this is fun. Like, this isn't like work. And so I decided I wanted to apply for all the academic jobs and tell them I wanted to do golf biomechanics, because it was way more fun to me than doing the knee arthritis stuff that I had done previously. And so I wrote up all my applications, applied to like a million different schools. I applied to, I think, 7 or 8 schools in Canada and got 0 jobs. Didn't even get an interview at a school in Canada.
Wow.
And then I was like, what am I going to do? I'm like, well, I'll apply for a bunch of jobs in the U.S. And I applied for, I think, 6 or 7 jobs in the U.S. and got all of them.
They don't like you in Canada.
No, well, I don't know how Sasho got his job doing golf biomechanics. He must have not told them that he wanted to do golf biomechanics, or I don't know. He must have just snuck in somehow, but I couldn't get a job at all. I remember I actually did have one phone interview, and a lot of the research in Canada has to be healthcare related, because healthcare is free up there. So they do tons of research to try to make sure it's as efficient, and they're helping people as much as possible. And so a lot of the funding comes through that. And I remember when I had a phone interview, and the lady's like, well, how do you think you're going to get this golf biomechanics research funded? And I had an answer for that. I was like, well, I think it's an activity of daily living, right? We can keep people active and healthy. And this was around the time that a study came out that said walking around a golf is 10,000 steps, which is the average requirement for daily physical activity that a lot of the scientific people were talking about. So I was like, if we can keep people walking and playing golf, keep them active and healthy longer, I think that could definitely be fundable. And was quiet on the other end of the line for a couple of seconds, and then she's like, what are they going to do the other 6 months of the year? And I was like, I don't know. This was before there were like simulators and
indoor training places. Yeah,
we didn't have that back then, so I think that's partially why I didn't get the jobs. But yeah, so I got every job I applied for in the U.S. and picked this one in Southern California. So I'm at Cal State Fullerton University, which is just outside of Los Angeles in Orange County. Really close to Disneyland, if people know where that is. And so I moved here in 2008, and I set up a biomechanics lab. So I have 2 force plates. I have a 3D motion capture system. I have EMG. Then we got a really nice donor to the university who's also a golf nut to donate a simulator. So we have we originally had a flight scope simulator, and now I use the GC Quad to collect my ball data. But the really interesting thing was there's a guy who was a member at the course that I was a member at in Toronto. His name is Bob Weeks, and he is the editor of Score Golf Canada magazine, which is basically like the Golf Digest of Canada. It's the golf magazine that everybody reads. It's in every pro shop. It's kind of everywhere.
Right. I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, and I was playing golf with him that summer after I did the little covert mission golf biomechanics study. And I was telling him about my little study, how I calculated the knee torques in the golf swing. And he's kind of like, okay, that's kind of neat, interesting, whatever. And then literally the week later, Tiger exploded his knee at Torrey Pines. And he calls me and he's like, we need to do an article on your little study in my magazine. Because everyone was talking about how the golf swing stressed the knee joint after Tiger had that thing, or the knee problem at Torrey Pines, which obviously, knee problem didn't originate at Torrey Pines, right? It just kind of came into the public eye then. But anyway, so I write up this whole article in kind of layman's terms on what I found, and it basically said that, if you have pain on the inside part of your knee, you probably want to flare your foot a little bit in your setup, because that'll allow you to take a lot of the stress off that. And so I wrote up this little article, and I brought it to his office, and I put it on his desk. And he was reading through it, and he looks at me, he's like, who would love this stuff? He's like, you got to meet this guy named Sean Foley. And I was like, who's that? I never heard of him. He's this young kid. He just started working with Stephen Ames on tour. He loves this stuff. He loves the science stuff. And so he introduced us, I think it was early 2008. And so we met a long time ago, and I've been friends with Sean ever since. And it was Sean who got me into working with Swing Catalyst. So he's been a kind of an ambassador for Swing Catalyst for a long time. And I think it was the 2015 Open Championship. We took my dad there because he was turning 70 that year. Was it 2015? When was the Open at St. Andrews last?
I think you're right. 2015 or 16. Yeah, it was one of those.
One of those years.
Yeah.
Whatever year it was that it was at St. Andrews last. So it was a really cool trip. My brothers and I booked the only place there is to stay in Pittenweem, Scotland. So one guy has like an Airbnb kind of deal in this tiny little fishing village where my grandmother grew up. So we booked the only place there is to stay there. We brought my dad over, and we had my brothers were there, and my little niece came, and it was and so we went across to the Open every day and played some golf. It was a great trip. And I think it was Wednesday or Thursday of that week where we're walking the course, and I get a text from Sean. He's like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm on 16. Where are you? He's like, I'm on 12. I'll come meet you. And so we met up on 14, and he's like, have you ever heard of this Swing Catalyst company? And I was like, yeah, I think I've seen some stuff online about them. I don't really know too much about them. Well, I guess they had a research director, like a scientist that worked for them, and he had quit the morning of the Open Championship, whatever it was, the Wednesday morning of the Open Championship in 2015. And the problem with this guy, he was really smart, but he did a lot of things that a scientist would do, and he wasn't a golfer, so he couldn't really talk golf language to the golf teachers. So the golf teachers got kind of frustrated because he couldn't speak their language, and then he got frustrated because he didn't really know what to do. He was doing all this sciencey stuff, and the golf teacher's like, I don't really care about that. Teach me how to make somebody better with this plate. And so he quit the Open, the morning of the Open Championship, whatever it was, 2015. And so they called Sean and said, Sean, our research director just quit. Do you have anybody you think can replace him? And so he called me. We met up on 14. I think I was on the phone with those guys that night, and hired shortly thereafter.
Wow. Fate, huh?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. And it's been one of the best things for me, because it's allowed me to be around some of the best minds in golf. So through my job with Swing Catalyst, one of the first things they made me do, this was like maybe November, December of 2015, they asked me to go speak at the Midwest PGA meeting in Kansas City. And so I had to go present. So I did a bunch of research for them before, but I hadn't presented before. And they asked me, like, we're sponsoring this Midwest PGA meeting in Kansas City. Can you go speak at it? I'm like, all right. So fly to Kansas City, get up there, give my little lecture on the biomechanics and the plate and all the stuff that I'd done. And then this older guy comes up to me and he's like, we got to talk. But it was like we had to be kind of quiet because the other person was, I think John Dunning was up there presenting at the time. I was like, all right, cool, whatever. And he gives me his card. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't even know who this guy is, but fine. And then John Dunnigan finishes and this guy gets up there and he has to give the keynote, and it's Mike Adams.
Oh my. Yeah, there you go.
And this was kind of a eye-opener for me, because previous to working for Swing Catalyst, I had been in California I started in 2008. So for 7 years, I had been in California doing golf biomechanics work. And it was getting kind of frustrating for me because, a lot of my golf biomechanics studies were like, I'm going to take an expert group and a beginner group and see what's different about their mechanics. And a lot of studies are done that way. Mm-hmm. But I would get the expert group in, which would be collegiate golfers, right? NCAA Division I golfers, because I had access to the Cal State Fullerton team. I had access to the Long Beach State team. And then I had access to, random other collegiate golfers that were in the area. And I would bring in, 20 or 30 collegiate expert golfers who are generally like, plus handicaps, guys that are shooting under par all the time. And I would find like 20 or 30 different patterns. It was really hard for me to find, a consistent thing. All these people were doing something slightly different in terms of their mechanics, which made it really difficult for me to do to do research.
So was this the entire body, or were you just talking about ground reaction forces in the lower body and the feet, like when you were doing your studies?
No, I mean I did one study on the ground reaction forces in the lower body. Phil Cheatham and I actually did one study on pelvic kinematics, like rotational kinematics of the pelvis. We did studies on a whole bunch of different things at that time, but it was kind of frustrating because I wasn't really getting any answers, right? We would find little things in our studies, but like if some golf teacher asked me, and that did happen. Like in Southern California, when we set up this lab, Dana Dahlquist would come by the odd time, and
sure.
Neil Smith would bring people by. We had, who was it? Andy, the Steck and Till guy came by one time.
Yeah, Andy Plummer.
And they're all asking Andy Plummer, and they're asking me all these questions. How I can make my player better with this information. I'm like, I don't know. And that was frustrating for me, and partially because, at the time, the first thing I did before I did the ground reaction force study was like kinematic sequence type stuff.
Right.
And the problem with the kinematic sequence type stuff, well, first of all, I had a really interesting conversation about kinematic sequence with Sean Foley. I think this was probably around, when did Foley start working with Tiger? Was that like 12-ish?
Yeah, something like that. Maybe a little bit before.
Let's say it's 2000. Yeah, let's say it's 2012. So I'm at Sherwood Country Club, walking the course with Sean, and we're following Tiger. And I've just started to do all my kinematic sequence stuff because, I've been working with Phil Cheatham on a lot of stuff, and we're measuring all these kinematic sequences, and I'm talking about all these kinematic sequences. Actually, no, I forgot. We weren't walking with Tiger at the time. We were walking with Hunter Mahan. So we're watching Mahan walk the course or play the course, and I'm walking with Foley, and I'm talking about all this, kinematic sequence stuff. And that's what golf biomechanists did at the time, right? Back then, sure. It was all about the kinematic sequence. And I'm talking about all this stuff, and he looks at me, he's like, I don't like that stuff. And I was like, that's what I do, right? It's like,
yeah.
I was like, I got a little bit offended. And I was like, what do you mean you don't like this stuff? What are you talking about? And he looks at me and he points at Hunter. He's like, look at that guy right there. I'm like, yeah. And at the time, like, he was making every Ryder Cup team, every President's Cup team. He was finishing like top whatever on the money list every year. He was always one of the best in ball striking stats. He's like, that guy's one of the best ball strikers on the planet. Would you argue that? I'm like, no. And he's like, he plays a Titleist ball, so he's been down to TPI a bunch of times. He's never had a perfect sequence the way you tell me he's supposed to have. Explain that to me. And I was like, I can't. I don't know. And I've never had a perfect kinematic sequence, and I can play some decent golf. Like, I would get in there and I would measure my kinematic sequence, and Phil Cheatham would look at it and he'd tear it apart. Oh, this is terrible, that's terrible, that's terrible, that's terrible. I'm like,
Yeah.
but I just stripe showed it. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And so, and then I would, at that time I was doing some work with Phil Cheatham and Terry Rolls, and Terry would give me some stuff to do, and my sequence would get better. Those little graphs would look better, but then I couldn't find the ball. I'd go out to the course the next day and the thing would go sideways. And I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And so,
welcome to the teaching world, man.
Totally, yeah. And so I was getting kind of frustrated with golf biomechanics. And then the 2015 Midwest PGA show came, and Mike Adams got up on the stage and he's like, listen, every golfer is different. So he's like, you need to figure out who that person is standing in front of you and how you can help them. And he went through all these little tests that he had, right, to put golfers in little groups. And I'll tell you, the one test that really kind of, because later on that day, I remember, actually it was earlier that day when he came up to me and gave me his card earlier. He's like, put your hands together and bend over and like in golf posture. I was like, all right, like, who is this crazy old man? And he's like, just move your arms to the right and let your right arm fold. And as I do that, my hand kind of goes in an under position, like I go into kind of a strong right hand grip position. He's like, that should be your right hand grip on the club.
You're under golfer.
Like, yeah. And I looked at him, I was like, are you crazy, old man? Like, I already hook it. Like, if I get my hand under there, the thing's going to come back at me. Like, are you kidding me? But what I found is my club face actually stabilizes a lot more. And that now I kind of understand why nobody could help me back when I was a kid, because everybody tried to weaken my grip.
Right.
And the weakening my grip actually causes the face to rotate more, and I would just hook it off the planet. And so everything kind of made sense to me when he said that, because when I started to try it, then I started to hook it less, and I was like, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
But what he has is a system to put golfers in little groups, which is what you have to do in science if you have a very variable population. If you have a population of people that are doing a whole bunch of random stuff, you have to do something called cluster analysis, where you put them in little groups based on certain characteristics and then see what's different about them. And so that is where Mike's little system of tests that put people in different groups really guided my research. And it's the stuff that's really made the swing catalyst plate and the biomechanics that I'm doing now, I think, useful to so many people now.
Right. Now you're putting people into groups as far as how they're using force, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So explain that a little bit for the listeners in case they haven't seen your swing catalyst information. I think it's brilliant.
Okay. So we have a 3D force plate, which basically measures all the forces that the golfer puts into the ground. And the three main forces that we're looking at are kind of the side-to-side forces, or the linear forces. Mike calls them the glider forces. Right. These are the ones where the golfer kind of pushes away from the target and the pelvis kind of glides or slides towards the target. It's interesting. I mean, that kind of sway, I guess you'd call it sway, right?
Yeah. We used to teach that back in the day.
Some people used to teach that back in the day. And then at one point it was considered to be the like death move in golf. I remember people say, oh, you don't want to sway in the golf swing. That's awful. Like, you need to get rid of the sway. But I think if you take the sway away from some people, you kill them. And if you add sway to other people, you kill them. And so the key thing is knowing who needs sway and who doesn't. And so that's one of the forces we measure, is how much you're putting that side-to-side force or that horizontal or linear force into the ground. And I always show Charles Howell III's data when I show this in my lectures, because that's one of his majority power sources.
Yeah, I was going to say, give an example of each of the three, which can kind of give some pictures to the listeners as well.
Yeah, so Charles Howell, I mean, you'll notice in his swing, like, his pelvis moves a significant amount, right? It gets on top of his right leg, and then it literally translates towards the target. So he's one that's one of his majority power sources. And I know he's kind of worked on his game quite a bit, and he's always kind of tinkering. So
working with Dana.
Yeah, I don't know if that's something that's still in his game, but it was at the time that he was measured.
Yeah, I think it's a little less now, but I remember those old, when he used to really cover it and slide and hit down on his driver a lot.
Yeah. And that's where it's funny how I think, some PGA Tour players, I think, can get away because they're just such incredible athletes with actually, not using the ground in a way that's optimal for them.
Sure.
But they're just such incredible athletes. And one that comes to mind from that is Matt Kuchar. I've measured Matt Kuchar a bunch of times on the plate, and he actually owns a plate now. He has one in his own house. And I think the reason he got it was because Mike and I were able to work with him at the PGA show a couple years ago on the plate. And he came in because he just wanted to look around, and Chris O'Connell was with him as coach. And he picked up a 7-iron and warmed up. And, his 7-iron or 8-iron, I forget what it was going, I don't know, maybe 82, 83 miles an hour.
Wow. Slow.
Slow, yeah. But that's and he's like, yeah, that's kind of normal for me. And then Mike literally gave him assessed him a little bit and decided, hey, I don't think what you're doing here is optimal, and altered a couple little things. And literally it was 10 minutes later, he was 95. He gained, I think, about 12 miles an hour.
Do you remember what that was? What did he do with him?
Yeah, it was, one of the things we found was he was out of sequence, because we'll get back to the 3 kind of lower body power sources.
Yeah,
but
sorry.
He's one of the only players that didn't use the sequence. I think 99.9% of golfers that I've measured use the ground in a certain sequence. So they use the horizontal or the linear force that we just talked about first. Then they use the rotational power source second and the vertical power source third. So it's a glide, spin, and launch sequence, or horizontal, then rotational, then vertical. So that would that
be considered the kinetic sequence?
That's what we've termed it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
that was one of my questions, was does that really exist? And that makes sense if that's what you're finding.
Yeah, I mean, and 99.9% of the golfers that we've found use it. That's probably the closest thing I've found to kind of a universal truth in the golf swing.
Gotcha.
Mechanically, is that everybody does that, and except for Kuchar, he never did it. And obviously, the guy's a cash machine, right? He's I trade
human ATM.
Yeah, and so there's something that can work, and I just think he's just got such incredible face control, and he just never hits it. He always hits those little kind of wipey pull cuts down the left side, cut back towards the center. And
so what was his sequence?
He was rotation first, and then vertical second, and then linear third.
Gotcha. Which
is, if you think of it kinematically, it's really hard to do. Take it to the top and then spin, and then jump, and then try to glide. It's such a weird sequence.
Don't tell Gigi that.
No, well, the thing is, I've had Gigi's guys on the plate.
I know, that was one of my questions. I was kind of leading a little bit, but we can talk about it in a minute.
Yeah, Gigi's guys do the sequence.
I love his stuff. I was just giving him a hard time.
No, me too. But they do the sequence. I've had Wolfie on the plate, and he has a normal. There's a little bit of a glide first, and then there's a lot of spin. He spins like crazy,
right.
And then he has tons of launch too, tons of vertical. But that's something that his guys do have the sequence, even though it kind of looks like he's trying to create torque from the top. There is a glide that happens first in all of his guys. I mean, it depends on the guy. Some guys have a little more, some guys a little less, and that's something that. Hanging out with George quite a bit, and he now has one of our plates, so hopefully I'll be hanging out with him a little bit more. He teaches everybody slightly differently,
right?
Which you watch his videos on Instagram or whatever, and you're like, oh, this guy's just like a one-trick pony. But I highly recommend, if anybody's out in LA, to go out and hang out with them and watch him teach for a day, because you're gonna.
I'd second that. I would love to see that too. I'm definitely gonna connect with him at some point.
He's such a good dude too. I've never been around so I went out to watch him teach one day, and he's teaching, and there's probably 5 to 10 people there that don't have lessons and have no other reason of being there other than it's fun, and they just kind of hang out, and they make fun of each other, and they at one point he was arguing with this one kid that oh, you're slow. He's like, what are you talking about? I ran track in high school. They're like, you want to race? And they literally raced down. And Gigi blew his hamstring, and it's.
Oh my gosh!
It's just it's just a fun place to be. And then he takes everyone out and buys them lunch every day, and I mean, I think you can say what you will about him, but I think our game needs a little more of that. More people out there just having fun.
I agree.
And wearing their flip flops and whatever it is,
getting squammy and crossed up and all that other stuff.
Or whatever it is.
Yep.
I forget what
so how? Yeah, Scoogy.
Yeah.
So how does he get? I mean, I hate to jump around, but this is kind of what I do.
No worries, we're all over the place.
Yeah. How does he get that linear piece? Is it the hip tilts? I think is from what I can.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, and if you watch,
because he gets kind of early with the hip tilt, which kind of gets that player going downhill, and then he can do the squat.
He likes that, and then you have to do a little linear to do that. And if you look at I don't know, like say Matt Wolf, I guess that's the the classic or the typical GG swing. He gets really up on that front toe, right? That front toe comes, or the heel comes way off the ground of the front foot, and the knee kind of collapses in a little bit towards the trail side knee. And so you're going to need linear force to get that knee going back over top of your foot. So even though it kind of looks like a rotation, there's some linear force there to actually get it going back to the left a little bit. And so you don't really see the pelvis sway as much, but there has to be some linear force there to cause the knee to go back on top of the foot. So, and again, I think there's different guys that he'll teach differently. Some guys need a little more of that, some guys a little less. So
sure.
As much as I think, if you get too stuck on watching Instagram videos, you just see people's highlight reels and not the nitty gritty of the day-to-day. And so there's a lot of stuff going on behind what he teaches that, those little videos in the net in the backyard don't really pay justice to, although they're super entertaining, I think.
Yeah, no doubt. I love it. All right.
What's wrong with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So get back to the three types of players.
So we have the horizontal, or the linear, or the glide, whatever. Some people have got on me because we used to always call it glide, Mike Adams and I, because like when I first started doing biomechanics work, people got on me on being too technical, right? You don't want to give me all that mumbo jumbo biomechanics stuff. Like, give it to me like simple. And so Mike Adams and I thought about it. We're like, well, that's kind of a glide, and then the rotation's kind of a spin, and then the vertical's kind of a launch. So we called it glide, spin, and launch sequence. And then everyone got mad at me, or some people got mad at me for that. Like, why don't you call it what it really is? And I'm like, I don't care. Call it whatever the heck you want.
Right.
Now I try to use every possible combination of words that so it's like a horizontal, a slide, a glide, a sway, whatever you want to call it. That's the first one. The second one is the rotational power source, or the torque. And this is something that we've learned a lot about in terms of how we produce it. I think, people used to talk about the squash the bug cue or whatever that is, where you'd kind of just twist your foot. And so I don't think that twisting of the foot, if you isometrically kind of screw your foot in the ground, so if the friction is there and you kind of leave your foot where it is but kind of twist on top of it, I think that helps because it can kind of preload muscles. But really what you're doing when you're creating rotations, you're pushing forward and backwards with your feet. And my analogy to that is if you wanted to take the top off a water bottle, you have to push in one direction with your finger and another direction with your thumb, right? And that's going to create the rotational force that's going to screw that water bottle off, or the top of the lid off the water bottle.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like that. That paints a really good picture.
Right, and that's exactly what your feet do to the ground when you're trying to create rotational forces in the golf swing. They have to push forward and backwards in opposite directions to create rotation of your body. And so when I first started teaching this, I would always ask the golf teachers in the room, how many people have ever had their trail foot slip in the downswing?
Everybody.
Most people put up their hand, right?
Yep.
And it's generally, and I'm like, which way does it go? And so it goes away from the ball, right? Your foot slips backwards. And so that's exactly how your trail foot pushes into the ground every time you take a golf swing. It pushes backwards into the ground, but because of the friction between your foot and the ground, you normally don't see that or feel that. And that's what happens is you're producing the action force. So this is kind of talking about Newton's third law, which is action. So when you push your trail foot into the ground and you try to slide it backwards, that's the action force. But then the ground actually pushes forward on you when you do that. And it's the ground pushing back forward on you that shoves your right hip forward and creates the rotation of your pelvis in the downswing. And so your lead foot actually has to do the opposite. Your lead foot has to push towards the ball with an action force, and the reaction force is going to push away from the ball and shove that lead hip backwards and create the rotation of the downswing. So you actually have to push your feet into the ground the opposite way of how you want your pelvis to spin, which that blows some people's minds. I've explained that to people and they're just like, what?
So what's happening when people I guess launch too early or kind of early extend, or what we call humping the ball? What are they missing there?
Well, that would be a timing issue. So generally they're introducing that vertical force too early,
right?
Because the sequence is glide, then spin, then launch, and the launch force has to be the last thing that happens. And if it happens too soon or out of sequence, then you can get moving towards the ball. And then generally what happens is when that happens too soon, then the spin is really small and there isn't enough rotation. because you can still launch quite a bit. You can still get a ton of hip extension and get that vertical force. But if you get the rotation happening first, then your left butt cheek kind of goes backwards and you kind of stay in posture or whatever, stay on the wall. But I think, I mean, what I've found from using the force plates now is, I think, TPI has helped make, early extension kind of the cardinal sin in golf.
Right.
And maybe, maybe my kind of view is tainted because, I mean, I don't think I've worked with too many like really terrible golfers, like the ones that would really, hump it as Scotty
Yes,
Hamilton likes
that's
to
right.
say.
Yeah, I stole that from him.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. But I think what I found is there's more of like an epidemic of late launchers, like people who have the vertical force happening too late versus too early. I'd say, 9 times out of 10 with amateur golfers, we're trying to move that vertical force back early. So I think everybody's so afraid of early extension that they're staying in posture so long that vertical force is actually happening a little too late.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so I don't know if we've, I think as in everything in golf, and I got this from Johnny Dunnigan, he says the best golf teacher is, what's his name? Goldilocks. Goldilocks is the best golf teacher ever. You ever heard that from John Dunnigan?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So he's like, there can always be too much or too little and just right for every single person, right? So I think at one point we're like, everybody's early extending, so stay in posture. Well, that was too much, and now we're too little, and we got to find just right. And so I think that's something that I've found. I mean, I don't know if it's if that was the case all the time because we hadn't been measuring all this stuff for you've only been measuring it recently. But I would say, with really good golfers, sometimes you'll see vertical forces too early. But with a lot of golfers, and again, maybe, I haven't worked with the really terrible ones that are. Right. It's rare that. I mean, most of the time when I'm working with this plate, it's with golf teachers, like other golf teachers are trying to learn how to use it, and so they're probably the ones that have read all this stuff and are trying to stay in their posture and actually going too far the other way. So
and I think it's probably, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm using Body Track, right? So I don't get the entire picture, but I get some of the stuff. Right. But a lot of times, when I've got, because I usually do it with video, what you think you see on 2D video a lot of times can fool you.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the biggest sales pitch for this type of technology, the ground reaction force technology, is that you can't see kinetics with your eye. So kinematics are like motion. So you can see positions, you can see velocities kind of. You can't really see accelerations, but your 3D motion capture system could measure those for you. But you can't see forces, the forces that go into creating that. So when I try to teach that or show that I think I do it in my level 1 swing catalyst certification. I have a slide of Kevin Streelman in his downswing, and we draw a line right through the middle of his stance, and you can see that like all of his mass is to the left. Like he's literally got his trunk on top of his left foot, and so you would think, oh, okay, he's forward, he's good, like but then when you look at the pressures, he's still got 80% of his pressure in his trail side.
Wow.
And so mass and pressure are not the same thing, and that's something you could never see with your eye. And I find the same thing with setup postures. So I always tell the story. The first time I started working for SwingCat, I had my pressure plate with me, and I was out on a driving range in LA to just set it up on a range. And one of the golf teachers I know here and I were out messing with it. We were hitting shots and kind of looking at the data and seeing what we could see. And this member came along and threw his golf balls down beside us, and he was behind us, and he hit like 5 hosel rockets in a row, like literally dead shanks to the right, and a couple of them like almost hit us. They like went right past us, like tin cup styles. And after the 5th one, he threw his club up in the air and he went to the back of the range. He put his head in his hands and he like sat there, and I was like, this guy's about to quit this game. Because, I mean, this course in LA, a lot of the courses in LA have houses on both sides of every fairway. Mm-hmm. And so
expensive houses.
If you're hitting hosel rockets, you're going to be in somebody's kitchen or living room, and that'll cost you a lot of money. So I'm like, this guy looked like he was ready to quit. And obviously, if you're hitting hosel rockets, you can't play. Things going sideways every time.
Right.
So I asked the pro, I was like, can I go to the back? Can I like ask this guy and see if he could hit on the plate? 'Cause I think we could probably help him. And he's like, sure. I mean, ask him if he wants to come. So I went to the back of the range. I was like, sir, would you mind coming hitting some shots for us? And he's like, no, I don't want to do that. Whatever, I'm fine. I was like, actually, we're just trying to test out this equipment. So if you want to just stand on the plate for us for a bit, that would help us a lot. He's like, oh, okay, I'll do that. So he comes up and he stands on the plate, and I give him a club, and I was like, just get in your normal setup posture. And he got in his normal setup posture, and I looked at the data, and like I looked at his posture like kinematically, like just position wise, and I was like, doesn't look bad. It looks okay to me. I don't know. Maybe some people in the world could have seen something there, and then I looked at the pressure, and there was absolutely no pressure on his toes. Like literally, it looked like he had no toes. There was nothing there. Okay. All the pressure was on his heel. Even though the foot was on the ground, he wasn't pushing at all. Like it was black up there, and it was red in his heels. And so I think that's kind of a fear mechanism. Right?
Sure.
Like,
yeah. I mean, that makes sense.
And we draw in, and I always tell people, that analogy, if you watch sports on TV, right, they're going to say like, the St. Louis Blues have the Ducks back on their heels right now. I was watching the game last night. Back on their heels means you're in trouble, right? Like if you're back on your heels. And so he's in trouble before he even took the club away,
he's trying to stay away from that golf ball in the hosel. Yeah.
But the problem was biomechanics is a game of opposites,
right?
When
he's going to react and go to your toes, right?
You're going to react and go to your toes, and that brought the hosel closer to the ball, and then boom, shank.
Oh, man.
And so literally what I did, and this is something that, I think golf teachers have gotten really into biomechanics, and it's unbelievable how educated golf teachers are in biomechanics. Like when I get on those golf biomechanics forums and people are arguing about coordinate systems for alpha, beta, gamma torques, I'm like, wow, that is a different level that people are getting into this stuff. So I like it. It's good. It's good that people are this passionate about their craft, and they're that wanting to learn and understand things. I mean, to me, it's awesome.
So you didn't get involved in the alpha wars, I guess. You kind of stayed neutral.
I did not. Yeah. Well, to me, the thing is, they're all calculated, right? So there's two places that we get external forces from in the golf swing. So it's our feet on the ground and our hands on the club. We actually have we can measure the feet on the ground. And so like when you stand on that force plate, there are little strain gauges in there that directly measure the amount of forces that you're putting into the ground. So those things are directly measured. There's one study that's ever been done that has directly measured the forces between the hands and the club. And this guy that instrumented a grip with all these little sensors in the grip, and he actually measured them. And I think
in Japan, right?
Yeah, that's where like Sasha and those guys talk about that quite a bit, because they're like my forces. But I don't know. I don't know where that grip is or why we haven't produced more of them. But
I heard it costs like $1 million is what I heard.
Oh, really? I don't know how much it costs, but maybe that's the case.
Yeah,
that would be a good reason why we don't have more of them.
Exactly.
But so to get the forces between the hands and the club, we have to do something called inverse dynamics. So normal dynamics is forces come first and motion comes second, right? So if I produce a force on the ground and that pushes my pelvis into a certain way and then my pelvis moves, that's how normal motion happens, right? That's what Newton says in his first law. Like things do not move without forces.
Right.
So if you put something on the ground, it'll stay there forever unless a force happens to it, and then that causes motion. So forces cause motion, so that's normal dynamics. But in biomechanics, we can measure the motion of the club. So you can measure the accelerations of the club through some, kinematic measurement tools like AMM or whatever. And then you can use inverse dynamics to calculate the forces that must have caused that motion to be created. And so all of those things are being calculated and so, Nesbitt has a model to do that, and
right.
Sasho has a model to do that, and they're all calculating those things. And so, I think the argument's over who has the best calculations or who's guessing the best, basically. And they're really obviously highly educated guesses that they're making. But to me, the proof in the pudding will come down to who can help people the most. You put a golfer in front of them and use those numbers to help people. And I don't care who's right or who's wrong. I mean, just if you can use that number to help people, then I'm down with it.
Absolutely.
Whatever it is.
That's what we're all about application on my side, right?
Yeah. And that's what I've been about with the swing catalyst plate.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to get up in front of people and try to pretend I'm smart and teach them a bunch of stuff that's not going to help them. And I think that's where, Mike Adams' stuff has really helped us put an application towards this plate that we can help people with it. We can get them to get people better. And everyone. It's not like you're just trying to fit everyone into one box and you'll help some people and maybe not help others. Because I've had those lessons before, right, where you just hit it terrible in the lesson, and the guy's like, just go work on this. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the case. I think Mike Adams told me once, if they don't get better within 3 swings, they're working on the wrong thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree totally with that, but within a lesson, they better start to see some change.
Something better, yeah. And it's amazing. Some of these golf, like I've been flabbergasted by some of these teachers and how much better they can make people in such short period of time by just adding things I think that match kind of what their body's designed to do, or how it's already been taught to move, and then taking away things that don't match, and things can get better really quickly.
And that's a great segue into one of the questions. And sort of we've talked about it and sort of skipped around it a little bit, but when we're using the force plates, because like I said, I'm using body track, a lot of times it's very difficult because there's no perfect pattern, right? I mean, there's no way, there's nothing that's absolute in golf instruction to know, all right, when we have a problem, what do we need to change and how we change it. And I know you've got a pretty cool test that you were doing. And you shared it with our section at your talk with your leg test. So talk a little bit about that, and we can discuss some of the things that you've found as far as, I would describe it as the more I use body track, I wouldn't say I've got all the answers with it, but I've got a lot of things that I know don't work.
Right. Yeah. It's so the leg test that we've kind of developed. I mean, I think it was really kind of, I didn't develop it. I think it kind of came from Mike Adams' ideas of posts. So, his front, center, and rear posting ideas. And I think there was one a couple of years ago, we all got together in LA, and E.A. Tischler was there and Mike Adams was there, and we started messing with stuff. And it seemed what Mike Adams sees in his eye when you put that club across the top of your thigh and pivot backwards, really correlates with the results of the tests that we do now. And I think the problem is, and I kind of always relate this back to, I don't know if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's book called Blink.
Not yet.
Okay, so Blink is basically, I don't know if you know about Malcolm Gladwell stuff. He got a really bad rap because he's
the 10,000 hour guy.
He's not the 10,000 hour guy. He just wrote about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of butchered it a little bit. And not really said what. So, anyways, some people are not big fans of his, but he's Canadian, so I'm a fan of his.
Okay.
And I kind of like the way his brain works. He just thinks about things in an interesting way. And he always tries to, so his books are basically about providing proof for an idea, and he brings in research articles, he brings in news stories, he brings in historical things. He just kind of brings a whole bunch of things to try to prove a point. And so in Blink, his point is that experts can see things in a blink of an eye that beginners can't see. And the story at the start of, and I'll probably butcher it, I haven't read this book for a while, but the story at the start of the very start of the book is some guy buys a really old house, and he goes into the bottom of the house or the basement where there's all this junk from, previous owners of the house that just left it down there. And he finds some, I forget what it is, a painting or a sculpture or something like that. And he's like, wow, this is pretty cool. So he takes it into a museum and says, what do you think of this? And they look at it and they're like, wow, this is a real, I can't think of the painter or sculptor or whatever. And they're like, this is worth a ton of money. And so before they pay him, they have to bring in the world expert to see if it's actually real. And the guy just walks in the room, looks at it and says fake, and walks out. And so it didn't take him, he didn't have to analyze it at all. It was something he could see in the blink of an eye that other people couldn't see. And I think that's, Mike Adams has been watching golf swings forever and looking at pivots and watching patterns. And there's something that his eye can pick up that. And it's funny how, when I'm around a really good golf teacher, they're almost human TrackMen now. I think a lot of them don't even need TrackMen because they've trained their eye so well. Whereas, for us rookies that haven't taught golf ever in our life, I'm useless without a swing catalyst and my Foresight launch monitor.
Yeah, I can get pretty close.
Yeah. It's actually a fun game too.
It is.
Let's see if you can get it.
They think you're a wizard. You're like, okay, yeah, that path was this face was that, and you're like, what?
That was -3.
I've only seen a million golf shots in the air.
I know. And then you correlated it. Yeah. So, but I think so. When Mike Adams does his tests, a lot of them are kinematically based, right? Where you watch it and you're just like, okay, this is what he is. But I used to get fooled quite a bit. I would watch it and I'd look at it and be like, I'm not really sure what that is. So I'd videotape it and send it to Mike, and Mike would be, oh, that's that. I'm like, oh, okay. So I thought I needed to find a way to make the test a little more scientific and a little less opinionated. I mean, it's not like it's opinion. I mean, I think Mike's really good at seeing things that I couldn't see. And so we started messing around with it, and we started doing this test where you'd hit a full speed shot as fast as you could with your feet basically touching each other, with your feet together. So basically what you'd done is you'd taken your feet 2 feet and made them 1 foot. So you have like both feet kind of working together as a single foot with your feet together. And then you would drop 1 foot back so that you're only standing on, let's say you drop your right foot back, so you're only standing on your left foot, and you tap your toe, and you try to hit a full speed shot from there. So like the right foot would be tapping, so there's no pressure on it, because some people cheat, and even though the foot's behind them, they really shove it into the ground and try to use it. And then you do the opposite. And whichever one of those 3 conditions is your, like, and I generally look at a launch monitor data, so I'll look at club head speed and smash factor. So I'll look at club head speed and solidness of impact or impact quality. And generally one of those 3 either pops out as being the best, or one of those 3 either pops out as being the worst. So there'll be 2 that are kind of close, and then you'll stand on your right foot and you'll just shank it, and it'll be like 10 miles an hour slower. Or 2 of them will be all right, but the third one will be like way miles ahead, in front, like way better than the other 2.
So does that tell you what type of pivot they need, or
basically what type of
do you find that a lot of players are going against that? Or
it depends. There's some people, and I found like in really good players, one of 2 things happens: either they're doing exactly what I think they should be doing and they're hitting it well, or if they're struggling with their game, sometimes like I'll say, oh, you want to try to feel like so let's say they're not loading enough into their right side, and which is I don't see this one as often as the opposite case, but
right.
Let's say they're hitting normal shots and they're loading like 70% into their right side on the backswing. And then I do that test and they stripe show it off their right foot and they hit it terrible off their left foot, and the middle one is kind of in between. I'm like,
Gotcha.
Well, your right leg's your strongest leg. So I'm like, try this, like just let your knee collapse in towards your other knee. So give it a little like Bubba Watson kind of deal, right? Where the lead knee collapses in, which really loads them into their trail side. And like, it's funny with really good players, like 9 times out of 10, a good player will be like, oh yeah, I used to do that when I was a kid.
Right.
And
they stopped it. They got taught out of it, or they stopped doing it because
or they stopped it for whatever reason. Yeah. It's crazy how that happens. And generally, like if that's the case, as soon as they let that knee collapse in, load more into their trail side, they'll go up, like depending on how much, they can go up a significant amount of. And generally I find like everything gets better. It's rare that I see like club head speed go up and then path and face go all over the place, but. And that was so I just presented last week at the South Central PGA section meeting in Oklahoma. It was in Tulsa. And so I presented my stuff, and then Marty from Ping got up next. And Marty's an unbelievable player. He played in the PGA Championship a bunch of times, so he always qualifies through the PGA
Club Pro
professional Club Pro thing. And so he's played in the PGA, but he was telling me how he's always considered himself to be sneaky short. And so he hit it out there, maybe 260 carry, 280 total or whatever. And he said he played in the PGA Championship last year and was paired with Kevin Chappell and Luke List, and he said he was like 50 yards behind Chappell and like 70 yards behind Luke List every hole. And he's like, I can't compete with these guys. And so I think it was November, we've been doing some work with Ping, and they have a plate at their facility in Phoenix, because we're doing some work with them on trying to use ground forces for club fitting purposes. And so they're doing some research for us there with the plate. And Marty, Ping's a really cool company. Everybody there seems to play, and they're always kind of all working on their games. And so Marty showed me a little kind of case study of his, where he had his original swing from when they first tested him back in November, and he didn't have much of that lateral force, that horizontal force, because I think somebody somewhere had told him to stay centered and spin, because that's kind of and he was like, I forget what it was, what club head speed he was. Let's say he could get up to like 108 or something like that. I forget exactly what it was, but he showed it at this meeting. And then I don't know how he decided to do this, but he decided to try to introduce a lot more of that lateral force, that horizontal force. And
you're talking in his backswing, right? In his takeaway,
So he
load a little bit more into that right hip,
into his right side. So
yep.
I think originally he was like 70%, and then he showed this other swing that he was working on with the driver, and he ended up getting like 100% into his right side, like tons, and his speed went up. I forget what he said. He was flying at 300. So from like
wow.
And so I think that's got to be a 10 to 15 mile an hour club head speed gain, just from messing around with the swing catalyst. And that's not rare for me to see that. And it's funny that he had never really, I actually had never shown him my little test. and most golfers had played around with stuff like that before, like as a drill or whatever. And I asked him, if you tried that test that I just showed you, like hitting off your left, off your right, and he even just kind of stood there and kind of felt what it felt like. He's like, oh man, I can hit it off my left. He's like, I feel so unstable. And so I'm like, so why not load into your right side if that's your stronger side? And so he was going to go home and do the test and tell me the results. But I would bet a lot of money that he would be a more of a right side dominant player if that introducing that change created that much more club head speed.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and you can find the opposite in people. I had this older guy at this driving range once. I was showing it to one of the pros, and he was hitting his 7-iron off 2 feet at, like, let's say 72 miles an hour. He was an older guy. And then I did that test with him, and he just standing on his left foot, he was at 77 miles an hour. I was like, you're faster off 1 foot than 2 feet. I'm like, just play like that, and I kind of joke with him. And then I looked at his pressure trace from his original swings, and he was loading like 90% into his right side because somebody had told him you got to load into your right side in the golf swing. And so I took that away from him.
And he wasn't getting into his left early enough, right? Is that what you found, or was it the timing of it? Oh, really? Yeah, okay.
Still getting to his left side fine. It was just that, like, when you're on your right side, you're still getting onto it, so it still has to contribute. Whereas if you just, why get onto it that much if it's not a I'd have to look. I'm sure there was something in timing too. I'll bet you he was a little late with it, because if you get onto your right side and it's not strong, then the trace kind of wobbles around quite a bit and you kind of get stuck back there a little bit. So actually that might not be true.
That's what I see a lot of with the amateurs.
Right. And so a lot of times, if you get on your right side and it wobbles around a little bit, I'm going to tell people, why are you getting on your right side? There's a bunch of really good players who have not got that much on their right side and played some really good golf. So and so literally I gave him a cue, which was kind of a stacky type cue, where you just keep your lead knee on top of your lead foot instead of letting it collapse in, and kind of squat into your lead side. Because what you have to do if you're very left leg down is you have to create some vertical forces. You need some, like Justin Thomas, you need some Bubba Watson, you need some of those upward kind of forces to create speed, because if you're on your lead side, it's really hard to create linear force because you're going to fall over. And then the torque is, you can get some torque, but I think that's what Mike Adams, we've worked on, is if you're a very left side dominant person, vertical forces have to be one of your main power sources. And that's one I think we've learned a lot about recently, because of players like Justin Thomas and those guys that are jumping off the ground and playing really well. I think there was a time where golf instructors would hold people's feet on the ground and say, no, you don't jump in this game. And and I think that might have created some injuries. And also, probably killed some people's golf swings, because Mike will always tell you, if Justin Thomas's dad has held his foot on his ground when he was a kid, he'd be selling insurance now.
Absolutely.
Not who he is, because that's one of his primary power sources. And luckily he was smart enough to leave that alone. And I think that's what good golf instructors do, right? For whether they know it or not, or they know why they're doing it or not, they've known to leave stuff alone. And I think now, as scientists, my goal is to figure out, why is it that works for Justin Thomas, and can we educate other golf teachers so they're smart enough to make that same decision when the next Justin Thomas comes along?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was talking to Sasha at the PGA show, and we were at Body Track, and he was talking about that very thing, about two players could be using the same vertical force. One could be on their toes and one couldn't be on their toes because of when they transitioned, they squatted or pushed into the ground more, right? So say like a DJ that probably pushes into the ground more and gets lower. So I kind of equated it. This is just me being a redneck. I was like, DJ's starting from the basement, JT's starting from the second floor. And he's going to be up on his toes, and DJ's not going to be. So I thought that was really interesting. It does give you an idea of, obviously you get a talent like JT. You better be real careful when you start changing the funky stuff. Sure, yeah. And I mean, it's to create, higher vertical forces, you need upward accelerations, or positive, or I guess upward's a good word, or positive accelerations. Sure. But there's two ways to produce positive accelerations. You can actually accelerate your body upwards, or you can decelerate downward movement. So if you drop really quickly, you need a huge force to decelerate that downward movement, which is not going to show up as being up on your toes, right? Because you're decelerating downward movement. So I think people who squat or like move down quickly are going to be the ones that have a lot of vertical forces but don't come off the ground. Yeah, kind of like Rory, right? If you don't really squat much,
and then you're producing vertical forces from there, that's when you're going to kind of jump up in the air. And I think that there's a lot of, our ability to squat and use that eccentric loading of muscles is something that I've worked on quite a bit with Ben Shear. So we have some little jumping tests that we do on the force plate.
Yeah,
that can help us determine.
Talk about that. That's the interesting stuff. And that was actually leading to my next question is, what are some of the applications? And I was talking to actually your friend John Dunnigan last night, prepping for this interview, and he said to say hello.
Nice.
And I said, what are some of the just little simple things that you do with players that get them to change those forces into whatever direction you're pushing them?
Yeah. So one thing that John Dunnigan and I have come up with, and John and I have worked together closely with another guy named Will Wu, who is a motor learning specialist.
They're doing a certification, I hear.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. To me, I don't know how I got off on a tangent, but I was going to talk about it when I was talking about the guy who was shanking.
Hey, that's okay. You can go back to that if you want.
Sure. So what I did when the guy was on his heels is I put my computer in front of him and I said, see right up here, and I pointed to the screen. I was like, see where there's nothing there? Make it red. And so he had to wobble around and figure out how to push into his toes and actually make some pressure or get some pressure into his toes. And that's something that Will has told me quite a bit. So what motor learning scientists do is they study how to teach people motor tasks. And we've done research for a long time in teaching people cognitive tasks. So we know a lot about if I want to teach you how to do math or do calculus or whatever. There's a lot of good science that shows, how to teach people that. And so teaching people cognitive tasks is kind of an older science. We've been thinking and talking about that for a while. But motor learning is a little bit newer. So how to teach somebody a motor task is a lot different from teaching people a cognitive task. And that's what he does. He studies how to best teach people motor tasks. And I think
I'm real interested in that because I think that isn't that probably what us golf instructors need to know the most?
Totally, and that's what I was talking about. Like we're getting so educated in biomechanics. So that's how we got on a tangent. We got started talking about club torques.
That's all right. Keep going.
They're so educated about biomechanics, but not so much about. And so I think, and the really good analogy that Will always tells me is biomechanics and golf teachers give you the ingredients, right? So we know we need a little more right elbow tuck. We know we need a little more linear force. We know we need whatever it is, right? So those are all the ingredients that have to go into your swing to make it a good golf swing. But motor learning specialists are the people who teach you how to cook. And so his analogy, I'm a terrible cook. I can't cook to save my life. So you could put all the best ingredients in the world in front of me and put them on a table and I'd still butcher it. It'd be horrible, right? Because I don't know how to cook. And so I think that's one of the things that, I think golf teachers have a lot of good ingredients. We have a lot of cool stuff that we can give people, but the next level is to then teach them how to use those ingredients to cook and actually, be independent and can make good food, as the analogy goes, right? Or make good golf swings when we're not there. And so that's the thing. And so one of the things he tells me with motor learning is there's a lot of really good science that says giving people external cues is much better than giving people internal cues if they're going to learn a motor task.
So can you give us an example of that? Do you have something?
Well, so a lot of people, if they had my guy who was shanking it and he was back on his heels, they'd say, no, just shift your pressure into your toes. I want you to shift your pressure into your toes. Well, your toes are part of you. So that's an internal cue. And that doesn't work as well as putting the screen in front of him and saying, see right here where it's blank, make it red. So now the cue is the TV screen. That's not part of him. And so he has to wobble around and kind of teach himself how to put the pressure into his toes without me saying toes.
So he has to solve the problem without you actually telling him how to do it.
Totally. And I think that's one of the good things that, and also you don't want to refer to body parts. So another thing, if you want to give somebody a kinematic cue to, let's say, get more open. A lot of people want to get people open to the target at impact, right?
Right.
So instead of saying, turn your hips through more because your hips are part of you, you'd say, take your belt buckle and turn it towards that tree.
Right. I've seen John do that. Yeah. JD does the stick. Just point the stick over there.
Point the stick over there, or turn your belt buckle towards the tree. And it's a very minute difference in my mind. I was like, what the heck's the difference?
I would agree.
But scientifically, it's a massive difference. And that's something that we need to start learning about. So I think that's going to be the next kind of wave of learning in golf instruction where we now have good ingredients, but we've got to become better cooks.
I like
and
that.
I butcher it all the time. one of the things that he says is a lot of times to allow learning to happen after the golfer hits the shot. How many times after a golfer hits a shot, if he hits it terrible, you as a golf instructor are right in there saying, "Oh, your left arm didn't do this," or whatever.
Right.
Da, da, da.
Yeah, you got to restrain yourself and let him figure it out.
He says, "Yeah, you got to shut your pie hole and just let them figure it out for a while. Let them feel what they felt. Let them see what the ball did, and let them process that for a while. And just sit there in like an uncomfortable silence for a while." Which is hard to do, right?
Yep.
Because after they've hit a bad shot, you want to be in there and give them the cure. But that's something that really inhibits learning. Which, so to me, I think this is the real next phase.
That's so awesome. Yeah, that you say that, because that's what we've been talking a lot about on this podcast. And I was talking with the game like training guys, Ian Highfield, and those guys, and we talked about that very thing. And I've been doing some work with Tyler Farrell and the awareness training, and it's exactly what we're talking about, is being able to, let them figure out what they did wrong and have them solve it before you jump in and actually help them. Like you said, that it blocks the learning process somehow, right?
Sure. And there's so much good science there. Like, it's funny when I work with my buddy Will, like, let's say, you got a guy who's slicing it and you're working on trying to prevent them to slice it. So you get all the cues or whatever and you get them hitting good shots. And eventually, so he makes practice plans. So a lot of times, let's say you get a golfer for a lesson, you give them a good lesson, they start hitting it better. You're like, okay, just go work on it. And so what do? They just go to the range and pound balls, and they don't really have a plan, right? That'd be like a strength coach saying, just go to the gym and lift weights. Well, no, you don't just lift weights. You give them exercises, you give them sets, you give them reps, you give them stuff to do in the gym that'll accomplish his goal. And that's what he does. He creates these practice plans based on what was the ingredients that were, discovered in the lesson, so that they can actually work on things. And there's really good science behind how to teach people or how to practice for things as well. And one of the things that I thought was really strange is, like, let's say I was working on getting rid of my slice. So one of the things to getting rid of the slice, right, you want to probably normalize the path. So the path is way left. And so, you want to, so if you have a launch monitor, you'll be hitting balls and you get the path a little more neutral. Well, in your practice plan, there'll actually be a rep where they're like, if your path was, let's say, 5 to the left and you're hitting cuts, there'd be a rep where they're like, try to get your path 8 to the left. That'll be a rep in your practice plan to do it like completely wrong. And
Gotcha.
like, that's something that, like, nobody would ever do that in a cognitive task, right? You're never going to give somebody a math equation and say, just like fuck this thing up completely, go to it. Like, you're never going to do that.
That's right.
But that calibrates your brain in a motor task, right? If you swing that thing 9 to the left, you're like, okay, I know what that feels like. Okay, now swing it 9 to the right. Okay, I know what that feels like. Okay, find the middle. And now your brain becomes a lot better at doing that. And so there's some really good science there behind when you give people cues, how you give people cues, how you take away, what the feedback you give them, how you give it to them, how you take it away. There's so much good stuff there that I think, that needs to be the next level of golf instruction. And I think, that thing that John and Will are doing is going to be awesome.
I think I know my next podcast guest.
There you go, man. Yeah,
I'll get Will on here.
Email, I'll give you his phone number. Yeah, it's. I mean, and that's something that it's really the next level, right? So
yes,
and he, he talks about, he works a lot with the U.S. Olympic Training Center down in Chula Vista, California, and they kind of got it figured out, right? They got like the coaches, they got the biomechanists, they got the motor learning scientists, they got the sports psychologists, they got the whole team there, to try to make these athletes perform optimally. And I think now the guys on tour, right? They got their strength and conditioning coaches, they got their sports psychologists, they got their biomechanists, they got their. I'm actually going out to TPC Sawgrass next week to work with a bunch of people, and they got their. All these guys in their team, but the motor learning scientist is one that we haven't had on the team in a golf team in a while. So I think that's definitely the next phase to teach them how to practice. So we're off on a tangent there. What else was I supposed to talk about?
I think we about covered it. I was just curious about any other like applications or drills that you give. Yeah, right. And then we'll pop into a couple of my rapid fire questions as we close.
I think one thing that John and I have worked on together, and John didn't even know he was it's funny how people who are really good at things just kind of figure stuff out, and they don't really know the science behind why it works, and eventually. So
I'll be one of those.
Yeah.
No clue sometimes, but just figure it out.
You just fall into it, right? Because you try this, it doesn't work. You try this, doesn't work. You try that, that works.
That's right.
Keep going. So one thing John always said in his lectures, which I thought was awesome, he's always like, the person who does the work does the learning. And what he's basically saying is a concept called reactive neuromuscular training. So my analogy for this is always, we know that when you're jumping or running, if your knee collapses in towards the other one, we call that a valgus collapse. That is what causes ACL tears. And so if you've ever seen there's that video of Robert Griffin III where he bends down to pick up a fumbled snap and his knee collapses in and his ACL tears. So we know that's a bad movement pattern. So when you go to the gym, I've seen people who've had their knees collapsing in the gym, and I've seen the trainer like push the knee out for them. It's like, no, you can't have your knee collapse in, like push it out over top of your toe. And they push on the inside of the knee and shove it out for them. Well, the trainer's doing the work, so the trainer's doing the learning, right? And so this concept called reactive neuromuscular training is actually to take a band around the knee and pull it in more. So if the knee collapsing in is bad, pull it in more. So
make them react and do the right thing.
So they have to react and find the muscle activity to stop it.
I like it.
And so that's kind of what we're using now to coach ground reaction forces. So let's say you're not producing enough linear force towards the target in your downswing. Let's say, I want you to load into your right side and produce a lot more of that lateral glide force or whatever. What I would do is to take a band and I'd pull you away from the target. So I'd literally pull you in the opposite direction. So you got to figure out a way to stop from being pulled that way and shove the other way.
Got it.
We do this a lot now with teaching people how to create torque. So we know that, your trail foot pushes posteriorly or backward away from the ball in the downswing to create torque. And so if I wanted you to produce more of that, I'd push on your leg and try to push it forward, and you'd have to resist me and try to shove it backwards again. And that's the same thing. Like and some people, like, you could push down, and that's what, like, I think Gigi figured out somehow. When you see those videos of him like down behind the person, trying to create something, because that's a lot of what he does is to create torque. And so that's something. If I take somebody to the top of their backswing and I want them to create torque in their downswing, I'll actually put my hand on the front of their pelvis. So I'm trying to pull them into more backswing rotation, and they got to fight through me and create that downswing torque. And then I
do that a lot. Yeah, I actually use the bands on.
Sure. Yeah.
Same thing. I'll pull them into early extension and tell them to resist.
To resist. Yeah.
It's amazing how that works.
Yeah, totally. And that's a concept that is called reactive neuromuscular training.
Now I know what it's called.
Sure. You're accentuating the error. So like a layman's term for it is called feed the mistake. So when there's a bad thing happening
I like that.
or a mistake, you feed it and try to make them produce the muscle activity to stop it, basically, which is really cool. So that is, I think that's one of the most useful techniques that I've seen in terms of altering ground reaction forces or changing or adding more of a certain one or another one. I think what we're going to try to do, and I'm actually heading out to Philly at the end of April to hang out with John Dunnigan and do some stuff out there with him. But I think what I want to do with John is create one thing that I think would be really cool on our Swing Catalyst educational series would be to have like a laundry list of drills or of little things you can do with your golfer.
Right.
So if
that would be helpful.
Hey, this golfer needs more linear, you could go onto the website and say more horizontal force and click it, and then all these drills will come up. You can click less horizontal force and all these drills will come up, or more torque or less torque or more. Because I literally think, the way that we use these plates now is to tune the forces to the golfer. So it's not always about cranking up every single force. Sometimes you got to turn down the vertical and give a little more linear, or turn up the torque and turn down the verticals. And so once you do your assessment, if you think you need this or this, and I think John's one of the best ones. He has so many different drills, and that's what we learned from the motor learning specialist is the same drill and this to two different people who have the same problem might not work.
Sure.
So it could work for one person and not work for the other person. They just need it presented in a different way. That's why sometimes you want to cue down by the feet. Sometimes you cue up by the pelvis. Sometimes you tell them a kinematic cue, right? So sometimes you can create more torque on the ground by telling them to turn their belt buckle towards the target, which is a kinematic cue. It's a movement cue.
Right.
But some people are more kinematic based, like that works better for them or that registers better in their brain. Some people need kinetic cues, so you need to have them push through your hands or have the bands or whatever it is. So. And that's the thing. I think the best golf teachers just have so many tools available to them. And so, if the hammer doesn't work, let's go get a wrench. And if the wrench doesn't work, let's go get a screwdriver, and eventually we'll find something, right?
I call it throwing spaghetti against the wall.
Sure,
find out what sticks. Yep.
Yeah, but I think what golf really good teachers do is they get better at picking the right thing. So
exactly.
As you start to see more patterns, you get way better at picking the right thing the first time, and that's where when you watch Mike Adams teach, sometimes it looks like a magic show. You're like, I don't even know what happened, and the guy got 15 miles an hour and he's pounding it out there. And but now I've seen him teach enough times that I know his little system that he goes through, and it's actually very, very systematic what he does, which is really interesting.
All right, that was fantastic. Couple of fun questions here. Maybe shift into some personal development a little bit.
Sure.
All right. So, how has a failure or a roadblock in your life or your career set you up for later success? Do you have a favorite story? I think we all have a few, but share one with me, please.
To me, I think the one that I told you there. I mean, applying for all those jobs in my own country and then just getting rejected from every single one of them. I was like, man, I was literally gonna sell knee and hip replacements.
I was gonna say, what was your backup plan?
Yeah, I had a job. My brother at the time was he was the assistant to the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs up in Canada, and the Toronto Maple Leafs GM had a buddy next door who was working for one of these. He was like the CEO of one of these orthopedic companies that made knee and hip implants. And because I did some arthritis stuff for my PhD, I sent them my CV, and they were going to hire me to be like a knee and hip implant salesman or whatever. I don't know. I think I was going to be in sales. I think I was going to be in R&D or something. But I was like, and then when I thought about that job and literally the money that they threw at me, because he was going to hire me, there was a salary, there was a whole thing, and he was saying, you're going to make this to start, and by this time, when you get into R&D, you could make this and this. And he was throwing these figures at me, and I was like, wow. And then I interviewed for some jobs in the U.S. and got this job at Cal State Fullerton. And the salary was I don't even think it was half of what that guy was throwing at me up in Canada. But again, I went back to my golfing buddy and said, hey, you got to make work less like work. And
I was going to say, you followed your passion and tried to find it. It's hard to replace a job that you love.
It's true.
I mean, it would definitely be a lot of money, I guess, but to show up as your job that you hate, it'd have to be a heck of a lot of money.
I know, and I'd be up in Canada in the snow, and I used to get so miserable in the winter when I couldn't golf. So now I'm down in Southern California, and life is good. And I think the money takes care of itself eventually.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, if you're doing something you love, you're going to figure out how to do it the best. And
I agree.
That's why
I get to travel the world and talk to and meet all you awesome people. It's amazing the things that golf has allowed me to do, and the people that I've met and the places that I've been. It's been pretty incredible. So I don't regret it for 1 second, but it was a little stressful at the time, let me tell you.
Sure. I understand. Well, we're glad to have you. That's for daggone sure. You're making all of us better, and that's why I'm excited to strengthen our relationship a little bit going forward.
Awesome.
All right. What is an unusual habit or absurd thing that you love? This is a fun one.
An unusual habit or absurd thing that I love.
How transparent can you be?
That's funny. That's a good. Well, so I mean, I'd say I don't know if it's an unusual habit, but I mean, I am literally a golf nut. I mean, I think I forget when it was the other day, the 2013 whatever tournament was on the Golf Channel, and I was watching it, whatever. I just love golf, and so I don't know if this is an unusual habit, but this is what came to my mind right now. But when I first moved to LA, as I told you, I had a golf membership in Toronto, so I was used to playing, private golf. And I moved to LA, and public golf in LA is brutal. There's a course near my house in Palos Verdes, and I went there one summer day where it gets dark at 9:30. I had a 1 p.m. tee time, and we finished 14 holes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because it was a 1 p.m. tee time. We didn't tee off till almost 2, and then it was it was the slowest round of golf I've ever been involved. It's just awful. And that is one thing I can't stand is slow golf. So, this guy that I work with here, there's a private course, a kind of a lower end private course right near my house, or right near my school, right near Fullerton, and they have the cart barn down this little hill, but they need the carts driven up the hill so the members can load their bags up and use them. And so the first tee time they have, actually did it this morning. The first tee time is the second it gets light out. So the first tee time this morning was 6 a.m. And so you have to drive all these carts up the hill, so they're parked and ready for the members that show up at 6 a.m. and want to play. And they said when the course first opened, they hired high school kids to do that job because It's a high school kid's job. You're driving carts up a hill. But the problem is you have to get there at like 4:30 in the morning because it takes you an hour and a half to get them up the hill by the time, so they're there by the time. And so the high school kids would sleep in or they wouldn't show up, and then it'd be a big mess, right? Because remember, they're showing up, there's no carts and blah, blah, blah. So this course decided to hire one older guy for every single day of the week to drive carts up a hill. And in order to allow them to do it or to entice them to do it, they give them like playing privileges. And so when he explained that to me after I'd played that round of golf where it was like 8 hours or whatever, so maybe I exaggerated. Maybe the fish has gotten bigger in the time that, but it was a slow round of golf. I was like, oh, I'm doing that for sure. And
so you pull the carts up?
So I started back in 2008 driving carts up a hill one day a week and playing golf. And so it's great because by the time you get the carts up the hill, the greens are perfect. They've just been cut. It's like the sun's coming up. And so you go out and play. And like I didn't play this morning because it just rained here yesterday and the course is underwater. But normally if I tee off at 6, I'm in the office by 8:30.
Oh man, that's awesome. You are a golf nerd.
Yeah,
I love it.
Golf. And like people make fun of me so much for that right now. Like you're waking. So literally this morning I was
respect, man. I think that's awesome.
I was up at 3 something in the morning and drove over and drove carts up a hill. And now I can afford a golf membership, but I'm like, why would I pay for it? Like it's just
no kidding.
It costs me a couple of hours of sleep a week. And there's something cathartic about getting up before everyone and getting, well, not even cathartic, but just getting across before the LA traffic gets crazy is a helpful too. But being able to, get a little workout in, run up and down those stairs, and then I carry my bag and walk 18 holes and get my golf in. And I think what this does to me too is it forces me to play golf.
Sure.
Like there's times, where I'll be in South Korea or Tokyo or whatever, and I'll land, and I'm like, there's no way in heck I'd be waking up to play golf the next day, but I have to because I have to drive these carts up the hill. So, and then by the time you get there and you're up and you get a little coffee in, you're like, oh yeah, now I'm gonna go out and win. So, it kind of forces me to play golf once a week, which I think is a good thing too. So, I love it. I've always loved playing golf. I think that's the reason why most of us get into this game.
Right.
And I think a lot of us, or a lot of golf teachers that I talk to now, I'm too busy, I never play. I forget when I was with Cameron McCormick I think it was last year or something. I was at his place at Trinity Forest, and we got him on the plate, and he hit like 3 shots, and he's like, that's 2 more than I hit last year. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, I think that happens.
It's easy to do. Oh yeah. I'm right there
with,
I got to force myself to get out and play, and then it makes you want to practice, right? Because
totally.
you want to get better and you want to keep your game up.
Yeah. And
that's so cool.
So I continue to do that, and everybody thinks I'm insane, but I don't know if that's a habit or if that's
that's great.
It's just a crazy thing that I still do.
All right. So on the other side, when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, like we all do in this business, or you've sort of lost your focus temporarily, what do you do? Do you have any tactics or things that you go to?
I like just calling guys up, and like calling guys up that have passion and that energize me in this game. Because I think a lot of times I get stuck in my computer or in my lab, and but I'll call up Mike Adams and just have a chat, or even just go I think every once in a while, I'll be around those guys, and to be around, to be around a lesson too when Mike Adams is giving a lesson or GG's giving a lesson, and just seeing people get better. And have fun, and that's why we all do this, right? It should be fun, and I think that energizes me, seeing people get better and having fun, and so yeah, calling friends that I've made in the game, or if I can't be around them, or to me, I like I said before, if you're ever in the Los Angeles area, go out and watch GG teach, because it's a fun atmosphere.
Oh yeah.
And you'll hear words that you have no clue what the heck that means. It's like a different language out there, but it's a fun atmosphere, and I think again this game should be fun, and I think sometimes I'm guilty of it. You'll get stuck in the lab and you'll get stuck crunching numbers, and that's really not what this should be about. So we need to keep in our mind, this should be fun. So let's figure out a way to make it fun.
So who do you think is the best golfer out of all you PhDs and scientists? Who's going to win at a match with you and Sasha, you think?
Well,
you're probably the two best, I would say, from playing's perspective. What do you think?
Yeah, we played together in Vancouver at the World Scientific Congress of Golf in Vancouver, or just outside of Vancouver, in July of this year, and Sasha was on the organizing committee for the whole thing, so he was running around trying to get everything organized, and so he hit a couple foul balls that cost him some shots. But and I know what it's like to be that person that's in charge of. You can't really concentrate on your own game, right? Because you're trying to get everything organized. So I nipped him by a few, but I don't know if it was a fair fight that day.
So it's a good match, though, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, he's a lefty. He hits it out there really well. So, yeah, so it's, he's, it was a tight track, too. It was a tough course. This one up in, where were we in? I can't think of the name of the little suburb of Vancouver we were in, but a bunch of the Canadian guys have come out of there, like Adam Hadwin and a bunch of those guys used to play at this course. It's got like such a reputation for developing really good golfers because it's like really tight and sloping fairways, and it was a good test that day. And so, yeah, I may have nipped him by a couple, but
I love it.
Shot that day.
All right, well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, last one. This is important.
Yeah.
If you could have a giant billboard anywhere with anything on it and put a message on it would get to billions of people, what would it say and why?
Jeez Louise, that's a tough one. Let me think about that. I mean, it's funny. I was in the Miami airport recently. So I was in Florida for a bit on a little vacation with my brother and his family and my mom at Christmas time. And I was flying from Miami to Dallas for the ABCA, the American Baseball Coaches Association meeting. So we're getting into baseball now. So I had to go there to teach them some lectures about ground reaction forces to baseball coaches. And so there was weather in Dallas, so we were super delayed. So I'm sitting in the bar, and there's this girl sitting next to me. We just started chatting because we had nothing else to do. We were killing time in the airport. And it turns out she was from Huntington Beach, which is like right next to where I live now. But she's like, you got to read this book by this guy named Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah,
it's called
The Power of Now.
Yeah,
I've read it.
And I'm not a whatever, I don't know what you call it, a spiritual kind of guy. But and so there's some but I read it. And I have it on audiobook actually, because living in LA, you need something to entertain you when you're driving around in your car.
Podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Podcasts are great, or audiobooks or whatever. Yeah. So I've been through it a couple times now, and I think just being present, being where you are right now. There's one thing in there that he talks about that really hit me. He's like, think about right now. Like, what problems do you have right now? And I'm like, nothing. I'm good. He's like, all your problems are in the future or in the past. Mm-hmm. You're either worried about something that's going to happen or something that did happen. Right now, I'm pretty good. So I think be present, I think, is something that I really got from that. And I think it's helped me a lot in the last couple of months to really, it's helped me with my golf game too. Because like, how many times do you get over and you're like, oh man, I played this hole yesterday and I snapped it into the woods.
Right.
That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you did yesterday on that hole. Let's be present and be where you are right now, because that's really all we can be. So that book kind of really stuck with me, even though it gets a little I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah, we won't go into that. That's a whole nother podcast.
Right, but being present, I think, is something that would be my advice to people. And I think in the last, I don't know, that was December, I guess, when I met her and got the audio book after that. And I think that's something we all can probably use.
I love it. That's great. What a fantastic way to close, man. I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and all that you're doing for us coaches to make us better. And I'm excited to someday be able to afford your product and do some work on it. But let the listeners know how they can reach out to you. How can they get a hold of you and give out your social media handles as well?
All right. Good thing I have my phone here because I don't know what it is. I'm terrible at social media.
I know you're not on there a ton, but
yeah. My Instagram is Dr. S.K. Lynn, DRSKLYNN. That's my Instagram. And then I do Twitter too, the odd time when people tweet me or whatever. And let me see what that is here. That one is Scott K. Lynn _PhD. So those are two ways they can reach me. Email is a good way to reach me too. So just slynn@swingcatalyst.com is a good way to reach me there. And hopefully one of those three ways would be great. And yeah, I mean, the reason I got into this thing is to educate golfers, and the more people that we can reach with the science, I think the more we can help people get better and make this game more fun for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks for having me. That was fun.
You got it. I will talk to you soon.
Take care, man.
What's up, everybody? Guru back here again with a couple of things before you jump off. First, big thank you to Scott for coming on the show and sharing some incredible knowledge and information that I know will help all of you coaches out there to help your players. Make sure you reach out to Doc on Instagram at Dr. S.K. Lynn and on the Twitter at ScottKLynn_PhD, and give him a social wave or shoot him a question because he's really open to share all of his great information. You can follow me on Twitter if you're not already. What is going on out there? I'm at Golf Guru TV on Twitter and Instagram. Shoot me a DM if you have any questions or any comments about the show or just anything in general. Happy to get back to you as soon as I can. Also, check out my website at golfgurutv.net, where you can find videos, articles, and more information on my teaching and coaching. There's such cool stuff there if you dig deep enough. I've got old Guru workshop videos of top coaches doing presentations. I've got articles, all kinds of cool stuff to dig into. So please follow me on my site. If you have any questions or a comment about the show, you can email the show at golfgurushow@gmail.com, or like I said, hit me up on the DM on any of the aforementioned platforms. This show and all episodes of the Golf Guru Show were produced by myself, Jason Sutton. Music is by Zach Mullet, aka Cutta Beats. Leave me an iTunes review or a rating. That also helps me big time in my ratings on iTunes, and again, helping me to continue to bring you this awesome content. And as I always leave with you, my mantra: study, practice, teach, and then pass it on. I'll talk to you later. Thanks so much for listening.